Some of you have heard this story, Zumbach the tailor. So this guy saves up his money because he wants to get a custom-made suit from Zumbach the tailor. And finally he has enough money and he goes and he gets measured. And Zumbach says, come back in a week and we'll fit you again, see how that's going. And he comes in and Zumbach puts the jacket on and the sleeve is like that too short on his left arm. And he says, did you see that sleeve is way too short? And Zumbach says, it's your posture. It's not the sleeve. It's very important that you have a good posture if you're going to look well. So here, let me adjust you. So he said, well, the jacket's too short. No, it's your posture. So finally, you know, after being totally adjusted, the guy pays this outrageous money and walks out of the store in the suit. And the first person he sees, I see you got your suit from Zumbach the tailor. That's how we are with our expectations about aging, with the cultural stereotypes that we have about aging. And we have to be careful not to internalize those. Because we've internalized these stereotypes about aging. And if we're not careful, we're going to fit ourselves awkwardly into that suit of aging that the culture expects of us. So I'm trying not to be forced into the culture stereotypes about what old age should be. So I'm working not to see every time I forget a name as symptoms of a disastrous Alzheimer's future. I'm not trying to worry that I can't ski or hike as fast or as long as I used to. Because as Dr. Bill Thomas, if you don't know about him, you should. He is pioneering completely new ways of housing for aging people. For instance, if you have smaller senior housing, people don't need walkers as much, or wheelchairs, because in a lot of those huge institutional places, they have to have those just to get around. But if people can live in smaller places, eat in smaller places, they can be more independent. And he's looking at all of this from a completely new perspective. He says something that's important, I think, for us to remember. We're lucky if we get to the old.
We're lucky if we what?
Get to the old. We're lucky if we get to the old. And too often we think, well, and we see someone struggling with infirmities that come with age, with illness that might come with age. Say, I don't want to get there. I don't want to be there. Well, sometimes that's true, but often if you talk to those people, they really are enjoying the things in their life in ways that more active people can't. We're lucky if we get. So that first transition into active retirement, if you will, is the first one I want to talk about. At this point in our lives, the oft-quoted question of Mary Oliver becomes ever more urgent. What will you do with your wild and precious life? As we get older, we become more aware that this life is precious because we see more and more every day how limited it is. We lose our friends, we lose our family, we lose some of our abilities that we've taken for granted. Each breath we breathe brings us closer to our last, and we don't know when that last one will be. Rabbi Dr. Sholomi says that the task of old age, therefore, is to be saved. The task of old age, therefore, is to be saved. Not in the theological sense, in the computer sense. I like that. How do I download all my hard-won wisdom and experience into the hard drive of this planet? How to make sure I don't download any junk? And for this movement we love, the question is, how can we best serve our faith from the advantage of this free and special time in our lives? At this stage in our life journey, we ourselves have become the gift that we can give to the world. Because we can give it in the way we choose, from our deepest and most authentic self, free of the constraints of expectation, political constraints of parish life, financial constraints of parish life, if it serves the greater good. As the Franciscan theologian Richard Rohr points out in his book, Falling Upward, A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life, you learn to positively ignore and withdraw your energy from evil and stupid things rather than fighting them directly. You fight them only when you're directly called and equipped to do so. Ironically, we are more than ever in a position to change people, but we do not need to, and that makes all the difference. Our actions are less compulsive. We do what we are called to do, and then we try to let go of the consequences. We usually cannot do that when we're young. How well I know. The class of retirees at the service of the living tradition with me in 2014 was the largest ever. I mean, they hardly had room for us on the stage. And there were very large numbers in the General Assemblies, the service of the living traditions, the years before and the years after. And I've had a lot of conversations with these folks, and they've been so rich and rewarding. I'm having some of them here at this meeting. Some have gone on to use their years of experience by serving as interims. Some are getting deeply involved in activism and politics because they wished during their parish years or their community ministry years or their years as an active partner to be more involved and to have more time to do this passionate work of healing our society and our planet. There are others who are just bone tired, and they need months and maybe years to be free of any major responsibility so they can play and restore themselves. But others of us are excited by the ways that we can minister and contribute to our faith in brand new ways, in ways free of other constraints, employment-wise, financially. Try new things. Minister from a deeper place, a more authentic place. One conversation stands out for me especially at our last General Assembly. A bunch of us, newly retired, got together. We just happened to meet in the hall, and we continued this conversation. Finding a word that would be the opposite of retirement, that would talk about active ministry in our movement, not based in a parish and not by a role that was described by anyone other than us. But we wanted to contribute. We wanted to keep making a difference. We felt we had power. Not the power that comes from position, but the power that comes from our experience, our being, our wisdom, and maybe our reputation. So how can we do then the opposite of retire? How can we advance and make a positive difference in the world and also in the movement that we love? There was a sense of excitement about this whole thing, and we really wanted to find a new word. Thanks, Tom, for those other ideas. One thing's for sure, we are not going to be counted out. We are looking forward to be counted in whole new ways. We have some things to say. We have some skills and gifts to contribute. We have time and wisdom to give. And we are feeling freer to tell our truths as best we know them, ever more effectively and more forcefully. You know, we are disappointed in some of the things in our movement. We're disappointed in some of the things that are happening in our association. But that disappointment comes out of love, deep love, lifelong commitment to what this movement can represent. It's frustrating being part of a free faith sometimes. Not that we'd have it any other way. I myself have often mused that our free, accepting, and embracing faith must be something that this world desperately needs, because it survived many foolish things in the past decades that should have killed it off. Sometime mid-career, I realized I was no longer a young Turk. You know, I had this idea of myself as a young Turk, you know, moving on into the future, boldly going where, you know, maybe some people have gone on before, but, you know. And then if I'm not a young Turk anymore, if all these other people, men and women, are what am I? Well, I guess I'm an old fart. I mean, but there's good things about being an old fart. You know, because one of the joys about that is younger colleagues come to us for their advice, for our wisdom, for our compassion, for our understanding of problems that only another minister can. And that is a beautiful privilege. As a young minister, I noticed a certain bitterness among some of my elder colleagues that came out of a disappointment about our movement and its association. And I knew that it certainly came from frustrated hopes and ideals. And you know, I told myself then, I'm not going to be that. I'm not going to do that. Well, I've been doing that. And I've been catching myself doing that. You know, especially I noticed that in Portland, we'd be talking about, you know, denominational issues, and I'd look at my conversation partner and they go, I said, I'm doing a rant. Somebody had pushed a button of a frustration I've had with my movement, and I'm doing a rant. And I said, well, so I decided to make a list of all my rants. And there were a bunch of them. Well, is that productive? And then I thought, maybe I could limit myself to just 4. Just 4 rants about what's wrong with our movement and our association. And so that's a discipline that I commend to you, limiting yourself to 4 rants if you got to do it, right? But I realized in a conversation recently, you know, so I've been able to joke with that. You know, I've been able to tell my rants and say, well, joke with it, you know. But in a recent conversation I had with some people, I realized there was a meta rant that included all the others. I know you guys are going to ask me what my 4 rants are later, but I'm not going to tell you right now. Because here's the meta rant. There have been epochal changes in our society since I entered the ministry. You know, started maybe like 40-something years ago. Think how much our society has changed in those 40-something years. Changes in family structures and behaviors. Changes in what motivates people to even seek religious community. Not to rebel maybe against an oppressive religious background, but to get some kind of meaning and stability in community. Changes in leisure time patterns and how much we have in work hours and income distribution and disposable income to support our congregations, in gender relations, in our diversity, racially, LGBTQ-wise, culturally, class-wise. Wow. Not even to mention in our technology changes. And here's my rant. Right now, we're in a decline in our adult membership, small, year by year, but for the first time in decades. Because unlike mainline Protestantism, we had been growing slowly. Now we're shrinking slowly. But what we tend to ignore is our religious education enrollment is dropping at what should be an alarming rate. We have this whole new millennial generation for whom organized religion is seen as irrelevant or worse. This is a time when we need our institutions, our association, and our congregations to be open and experimental and nimble. We need to be able to fail without consequences of being blamed, because experimentation and trying new things means failure. We have a culture of blame sometimes. And yet, our association and other aspects of Unitarian Universalist institutional life have made very few changes in the way we do things in those decades. We still use those models. We're stuck. And I thought, why is that? I'm not sure. Maybe it's because we think we need to have a 3-year-long commission and a lot of newsprint to make any kind of changes at all in the way our institutions run. My argument, unlike some of those bitter old ministers of my younger days, is not that we should do things like we did in the past. It's quite the opposite. I think we should, by God, move on from doing things just like we've always done them, because it's a whole new world out there.
Amen.
You know about those old reliable rules of thumb? For instance, when your sanctuary is 2/3 full, people feel like there's no room for them, and you need to either build or go to 2 services. Well, that was true. I can attest to it. It was a really good rule of thumb. Maybe not anymore. Just last week, a younger colleague was telling me that he is asking his congregation to go back to 1 service because he thinks that's going to increase the overall attendance. Why? Well, he's done some research. And he thinks that millennials are like crowds. That millennials don't have that same sense of personal privacy and space that our generations do. And being in a crowd is where it's exciting, where it's happening. You want to be where it's happening, where everyone goes. So they're moving back to 1 service. I'm not sure that's right or wrong. I don't know. But I admire the experimentation that's going on here. And we'll see. We'll see. We need to start questioning almost everything. Almost everything about the way we do things. And we can't have these groaning, long, killing trees, newsprint processes of processing everything till it dies. And we've seen that, haven't we? We need to be able to have more adventure, more experimentation, more ability to move forward. And why not we, the elders, leading that charge? Because one of the jobs of an elder is to speak the unspeakable. Because we're free to do it. Now, that doesn't mean to do it in the way that your worst critic back in the parish did it. Sometimes we criticize, our UUA officials and others in a way that we would hate if somebody in the parish did it. So we need to have right speech. The Buddha talked about what's right speech. It's true. It's helpful. A lot of what we complain about is we do it in a way that's not helpful. It's done at the right time. It's done in a way to be sure there is no harm if we can. And it's done for the benefit of all. This is a tough discipline. If we're going to speak the unspeakable, that's how we should do it. Because we do want to have the changes that we'd like to see, or to see why we shouldn't. And then, if they don't happen, with a peaceful heart, we should let it go and trust the future. And it's a crisis. Those who study aging don't see it as just one phase of life, but at least two. Gerontologists call it young old age and old age proper, sometimes old age. Somebody just yesterday quoted Richard Gilbert to me. The stages of retirement is go, go slow, no go. That's probably right. Pardon?
That was Joyce Smith.
It was Joyce Smith? Great, thank you. This is a time when the young old age, when retired folks' life is defined by desires and interests, a time of increased freedom to make choices that enhance life. But individuals' capacities will diminish when we move into old age proper, when concerns of health, safety, and frailty become more and more important. Does that mean we don't minister anymore? I don't know, I'm not there. But I'm trying to be prepared to be there. And here are my thoughts. If we're lucky enough to survive to this stage, it's inevitable. And this aspect of old age is the one that's most feared in our culture. It's full of losses and goodbyes. It's a stage that psychoanalyst Erik Erikson describes as integrity versus despair. We either look back on our lives with a sense of satisfaction of having lived a good life, of having contributed to the well-being of others in our world, or we wrestle in the final years with a sense of disappointment, lost opportunity, and regret. Jungian therapist Helen Luke describes this time as a journey into simplicity, a journey into simplicity. We want to be able, she says, to identify more and more with all those things that never die. Ram Dass describes it as living less from the ego and more from the perspective of the soul and the spirit. The Spanish philosopher Miguel de Unamuno wrote that faith equals trust in an underlying life force that is so strong it even includes death. If we meet this stage of life successfully, we have a deep appreciation of the smaller pleasures. So I look to role models. I look to role models as people who do struggle with health and mobility and safety and yet radiate joy. These are my spiritual teachers. I'm going to need those lessons. I know that. Moving along to identify with those things that never die. As the Renaissance scientist Giordano Bruno said as they were about to burn him at the stake for heresy, you cannot fall out of the universe. We have a deeper identity with the web of all being, with God, and we're grateful for our part, our individual part, to have played in this greater eternal being. And that's why spiritual practice is more and more important. Being mindful, the skills we have learned about living in the present moment, about being mindful, about penetrating our fears, about accepting our reality, become more welcome at this time. As Byron Katie said, if you fight with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. And yet we do. It's difficult to know what we need to accept and what we need the courage to change. And I think that might happen more and more as we age and our limitations become more real. Comfort in this, have proclaimed that a deep joy, a sense of well-being beyond outer conditions is our birthright as human beings. And spiritual traditions, spiritual practices are meant to uncover this natural sense of thriving, of being. In order to experience and stabilize the state, we need to be ceasing more and more to identify with our smaller selves, our personal needs, and live more and more from wisdom and compassion, to recognize the illusion of our separateness and that is the source of our suffering. This metaphor is very old, and I think it's very apt. The sense of the wave arising out of the ocean, feeling its power, enjoying its waveness, grooving on the whole thing, and then it sees its brother and sister waves crashing and dying on the beach. And of course the wave is sad and doesn't realize that it's simply an expression of the ocean, which is eternal and never dies. Our spiritual practices can lead us to more and more experience, not think about or believe, but experience our identification with the ocean. As the Christian mystic Elizabeth of the Trinity said, in the evening of life, love alone remains. Hardly any of you know that Marty, Harmony, and I died at the very same time in the year 2002. Right, Marty? Remember that? So this is my 50th year, and I was attending, along with Marnie and some others, a week-long retreat with the Zen master, Joan Halifax Roshi, for professionals called Being with Dying. I thought we'd be learning skills to deal with parishioners or patients or clients who were dying. But we were confronted from the very first moment in this silent retreat with our own inevitable death. And there was one meditation, Tibetan death yoga, art all over the place about death and skeletons and everything. They told us that people of these Being with Dying retreats ate twice as much food as the other retreats. Because we couldn't talk or do anything other distractive. And we did a visualization of the worst possible death we could imagine. We had to get right in that. And with the best possible death we could imagine. And when I came back from that retreat, I talked to Sonia, and I told her that the best possible death I could think of was being surrounded at home by loved ones. And she said, "You know what I love about that, Arvid?" And I said, "No, what?" She said, "I'm still alive!" Love this woman. Anyway. It was very heavy at first, but at the end, I never felt lighter. There was this joy. The ocean was very real. The wave, I could accept that it would go. And since then, I think I can say this honestly. I won't know until the moment comes. But I think I can say this honestly. There's a lot of things I still want to accomplish. There's a lot of things I want to do. There's a lot more love I want to give. But if I die tomorrow, I will be content. I'd be ready to go. And the final activity they asked us to do was to write a death poem in the Japanese tradition. So I'll share mine with you. I have loved and been loved. I've always sought the light. May my forgetfulness blow away with my ashes. Now, lately I've been more and more interested in what may happen after death. I'm really interested in the Tibetan death yoga and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I'm taking an online course now about after-death yoga called Now You're Dead, So What? Living as Arvid Straube. After all, Mark Twain said, "I do not fear death. I had been dead for billions and billions of years before I was born, and suffered not the slightest inconvenience from it." Even the Tibetan view is if you are aware enough at that moment of death, then you're not reborn into a new separate self in this body of suffering. But you recognize your oneness with the ground of all being, which is the best possible outcome. Like Walt Whitman said, what do you think has become of the young and old men? What do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there really is no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait in the end to arrest it, and ceased the moment life appeared. All goes outward and outward. Nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. So perhaps the last, maybe profound act of ministry that we can do is to die well. Mm-hmm. Maybe we need to get ready to do that. The British historian Arnold Toynbee is said to have said that death is un-American. I think he's right. Death is a failure for so much of our medical profession. And I'm so glad that the Being Mortal book and television special has gotten so much attention. Maybe things will change because there's so much it's so much unneeded suffering that goes on by people's attitudes about death. As Stephen Levine, who's a Buddhist teacher who works with the dying, says, death is not the enemy. The enemy is lovelessness and ignorance. Death is not the enemy. And yet we fight death as if it were the enemy. Almost everyone, when full of surrounded by noise and strangers and frantic energy. So I really think it is an act of ministry to plan well for our deaths. And you don't need to be ordained for this, because that act of ministry has been shown to me so many times by people that I've served and I grieve still. It's an act of ministry to plan well for our deaths and to give an example to the world of dying well. For a long time after that retreat, I had a ceramic Mexican Day of the Dead skull on my altar of sacred reminders. And I would think of the motto that medieval monks said to each other when they passed in the cloister: memento mori, remember death. Every day they'd say that. It's not morbid. As I found, to face that reality frees us, lightens us. And that means that we should be taking care of any unfinished business, which would have us leave the world with pain and regret. To ask ourselves, maybe every day, who do I need to forgive? Of whom do I need to ask forgiveness? What regrets, things I can't do anything about, do I need to just let go of? What words of love and thanks have yet to be spoken? What memories do I need to share? What songs do I need to sing? What farewells do I need to say? Death is largely a threat only to those who have not lived their life. What's your unfinished business? Remember that at the end of our days, the question will not be how much you have, but how much you have given. Not how much you have won, but how much you have loved. There's a chant said at the end of the day at Zen retreats I'd like to leave you with. Let me respectfully remind you that life and death are of ultimate concern. Time passes swiftly by and opportunity is lost. Wake up. Wake up. Do not squander your precious love. Thank you.